One of the things that I intend to do as president is to restore America's standing in the world. We, I think, are going to have a lot of work to do in the next administration to restore that sense that America's that shining beacon on a hill.
I believe with all of my heart that this is a new era for America. The heart of smart power are smart people. And Mr. President, we have them in abundance here in the State Department.
In a word, the culture at the State Department is arrogance. They believe that they know better than anyone else.
I've been a reporter in Washington for nearly 30 years, and the level of politicization within government has reached extraordinary levels.
Well, that's the nature of a bureaucracy. I mean, people get very invested in it. These are people who've had 20 or 30 years in the system. They only know how to operate within the system. So if you look at Benghazi, there was all sorts of machinations early on to protect Mrs. Clinton, to protect the State Department, to say, oh no, we didn't do anything wrong. This is just the way things are done. You don't understand that.
Political officials are allowed to influence important policy and national security events for political reasons and not for the good of the country, and I think it's a very serious problem.
I was instructed not to allow the RSO, the acting deputy chief of mission, and myself to be personally interviewed by Congressman Chaffetz.
So the people at State told you don't talk to the guy who's coming to investigate?
Yes.
Have you ever had anyone tell you don't talk with the people from Congress coming to find out what took place?
Never.
Cheryl Mills is angrily on the phone with folks saying, no, don't talk to this guy. And that's highly inappropriate. But that's, they're always pressing the boundaries of what they can get away with. That's their MO. Whatever they can get away with, they'll try to get away with.
At the State Department, what you have to understand is that the entire system is run by the Foreign Service officers who make up the various panels, who look at everything from promotions to pay to grievances, and they have, again, a mentality of protecting their own. It's a very insular culture, even by the standards of Washington or government agencies.
One case involved the U.S. ambassador to Belgium, Howard Gutman, suspected of soliciting prostitutes in a public park.
First of all, the State Department doesn't want to be held accountable because the institution does not want to take blame upon itself. It's the nature of the beast to protect the institution.
We were very upset. We expect to see influence, but the degree to which that influence existed and how high up it went was very disturbing.
You can break laws at the State Department. You can commit felonies against the State Department. You can commit felonies of defrauding the State Department, and you won't get fired as long as you're loyal to the Foreign Service. If you do nothing wrong other than expose wrongdoing, however, and you cross the Foreign Service, they will make your life miserable. They will come after you.
Welcome to the season premiere of For the Record. I'm Lori Dew. Tonight's 1-hour special is the result of a 5-month investigation into mismanagement, wrongdoing, and lawlessness at the State Department. This is an agency that is so adept at damage control, it demonstrates why cases like Benghazi remain unresolved. You'll meet a diplomatic security service agent named Rick Higbee, a man who is in the midst of a 15-year battle that began as a discrimination complaint against his supervisors. But Higbee's employment dispute would eventually expose widespread corruption that included rampant drug use, sexual assaults, and even charges of pedophilia. It was Higbee's case that ended up revealing the dark secrets held by career diplomats and political appointees inside the Department of State. We begin with his story, a journey that left Rick Higbee fighting one of America's most powerful government agencies.
Okay, production 154, Honor Fight. This centers on the State Department, more specifically State Department security. Let's start by our central figure here, Rick Higbee. Why do I care about Rick Higbee?
Well, Rick's an agent with diplomatic security. He's been with the State Department about 16 years. On the surface, his story sounds like an HR complaint, but once you start digging into it, it's much, much bigger than that. It involves cover-ups and criminal behavior.
He went through this 15-year battle inside the State Department. His court filings and EEO complaints really blew the lid open on a major scandal inside the department.
For more than 15 years, Rick Higbee has served the nation in the State Department's Diplomatic Security Service, known as DS.
On August 18th, 1998, my daughter Logan Higbee was born, and on August 24th, I started my first day at the State Department.
While at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, Higbee's life took a dramatic turn.
My father called the police academy. Gosh, I haven't thought about this in so long. It's a little hard. Called the police academy to tell them that there was a medical emergency having to do with my daughter. I left a piece of tape on my door, and I just remember going there and saying, "Please don't tell me my daughter's passed away."
Logan was suffering from tuberous sclerosis, a rare life-threatening disease. In 1999, Higbee was assigned to Houston, Texas. That's also where Logan would begin receiving treatment. However, as her condition worsened, so did Higbee's relationship with his supervisors at DS.
It was seen as a weakness for whatever reason, and a problem because I could not further the individual career of that supervisor. So as time progressed on, it became glaringly clear the opinions of that office were that you need to quit DS. You need to quit the State Department because you have a sick kid. And I quote, "We didn't hire your daughter. We hired you."
Who said that to you?
Tim Haley.
Higbee said working for Tim Haley, the special agent in charge of the Houston office, was emotionally draining. One of the most challenging times was in early 2000, when Logan underwent an aggressive form of brain surgery. The family was huddled at the hospital, hoping and praying.
The doctor said, "Don't leave, because she might not make it." So we hunkered down in a room that was for the doctors to sleep. And if you don't have faith, you sure do in a moment like that. And remarkably, God kept her here. And in the morning, when she was in recovery, after hours and hours of surgery, I get a call from Special Agent in Charge Tim Haley that orders me to come back to the office, knowing that I'm in recovery, where my daughter could pass away at any moment, to finish my employee evaluation response so that he could be the first special agent in charge within the field office structure to turn all his reports in.
Higbee was given an ultimatum: return to the office or he would be reported AWOL.
And my wife said, "Don't leave." And I said, "I have to. This is the only thing we have. This is our stability." And she said, "Well, if you leave, don't come back." I can never give that back to my wife.
In 2001, Higbee filed a discrimination complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, known as an EEO. Higbee claimed his supervisors were hostile because of his obligations to his sick child.
I took assignments on protection for foreign dignitaries while my daughter was in the hospital. But soon it became somewhat of a problem for the managers that I worked for because, in their mind, I was not worldwide deployable. So by me not being deployable like the person sitting next to me, it was seen as a weakness for whatever reason, and a problem because I could not further the individual career of that supervisor.
I've been involved in more than a few matters involving the State Department, and for whatever reason, the State Department seems to be especially challenged in that space.
Joseph Schmitz served as the Inspector General for the Department of Defense from 2002 to 2005. He now works in private practice, where a portion of his casework is dedicated to representing whistleblowers and government employees and contractors who have filed EEOs.
That's where I cut my teeth, and it was really bad. I mean, I had in my State Department matter, I had the supervisor literally tell me that he deprived my client of an advancement opportunity because he had filed a complaint.
The system is structured so that if you are outspoken, if you're the nail that sticks up, you get hammered. And the way that you get hammered is that your career can be ended, you require assignments to different posts or to different responsibilities within the government agency.
Bill Gertz is the senior editor of the Washington Free Beacon. He has worked in the nation's capital for more than 30 years as an investigative reporter.
Once you speak out and once you go against the established bureaucracy, it mercilessly attacks people who speak out against it.
On the same day the nation witnessed the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, Higbee says his supervisor appeared more concerned about his EEO complaint than the attack on the nation.
You think we would all be focused on what's important. But instead, I'm kept in a room in my office with another supervisor for 6 to 7 hours and threatened with his finger in my face and on my chest to the point that I was crying because I filed this EEO complaint, and if I'm not scared of him, I need to be. And I better drop this complaint. I did not know how powerful he was, he said.
At the State Department, what you have to understand is that the entire system is run by the Foreign Service officers who make up the various panels, look at everything from promotions to pay to grievances. And, you know, they have, again, a mentality of protecting their own. It's a very insular culture, even by the standards of Washington or government agencies.
Joel Mowbray is an investigative reporter and the author of the book, Dangerous Diplomacy: How the State Department Threatens America's Security.
I couldn't necessarily say that the Foreign Service is a mafia, because most mafias aren't as powerful and able to act with the impunity that the Foreign Service is able to. They are essentially untouchable. The mafia, at least, has to worry about law enforcement, prosecutors bringing RICO statutes. They have to worry about other mafias out there in competition. The Foreign Service and the State Department overall, they act with utter impunity.
Before Higbee's EEO was investigated, the supervisor at the center of the complaint, Tim Haley, was promoted to regional security officer and transferred to Bahrain.
And so then the State Department's EEO office did not investigate my complaint at all. They sat it on a shelf. They did nothing with it for 2 to 3 years.
5 years after filing his complaint, the State Department settled Higbee's case by assigning him duties that would keep him near his daughter, Logan. Much of Higbee's time was spent working with presidential details.
I was with the Western White House as the State Department liaison, not just for diplomatic security, but for all State Department matters, for the entire time that the Western White House was practical home base for President Bush. We had Saudi Arabian visits, and the State Department's access was elevated as a result of the relationships built with the guy that had continuity. And, you know, we supported the Secretary of State, Secretary Powell, and Secretary Rice.
While Higbee felt his career was back on track and the issues surrounding his complaint were behind him, his troubles were far from over.
All right, so Higbee goes through the proper chains of command that we can see. He gets his initial EEO case settled, and then he ends up with a decent career path, it looks like. He has a lot of high-profile assignments. He's back on track. How do we get from there to another major scandal?
Well, according to Rick, once you filed that complaint, retribution never seemed to end. And that's consistent with what other whistleblowers we've spoken to have told us. You know, the bureaucracy always ends up viewing you as the target. And there are managers that are absolutely willing to work outside of the law to protect the department.
He found other people experiencing the same thing. I mean, through his complaints and his litigation, they really open up a Pandora's box of some seriously nefarious conduct inside the State Department. We're talking about stuff that goes all the way to the highest levels.
In theory, you can get reinstated, you can get back pay, you can get promoted retroactively, you can get restored to the position you should have been in, but as a practical matter, you should be looking around. You're probably not going to be fully restored.
I've seen people lose out on promotions. I have seen people taken from plum assignments and put essentially in the basement at Foggy Bottom, which is basically as far down as you can go, both literally and of course in terms of employment. They will harass you, the other employees will shun you and treat you like a pariah, and I've seen this time and again.
A group of DS managers had their sights set on getting rid of Higbee. Emails obtained during this investigation clearly show Higbee was the target of a number of Foreign Service supervisors, especially Supervisory Special Agent Jeff Thomas. In a December 2009 email, Thomas calls Higbee a, quote, a-hole who's screwed with the wrong person. There were other derogatory emails as well, many of which were sent to Thomas's direct supervisors, Marion Cotter and Paul Valley, including this one from November 2010, where Thomas suggests that another employee carry out a drive-by shooting at Higbee's home.
The supervisor that I had said, you need to send down somebody to fix this because Marion Cotter and Jeff Thomas and Paul Valley are out of control. They came down and did a management review that was unlike anything I've seen because my supervisor at the time called the director and said this is blatant retaliation.
In my nearly 3 decades of covering U.S. government and the State Department in particular, I've found that there's a kind of bureaucratic mindset or a bureaucratic culture which calls for the administration of these agencies to close ranks whenever there's an exposure or a disclosure of some wrongdoing or impropriety. And it's an extreme measure in that they go after people and try to basically discredit them and undermine their story.
In October 2011, Higbee filed a federal lawsuit against the State Department. As he began to develop his case, his legal team discovered that reports of management misconduct went well beyond Higbee's case.
Here I am over in my lawsuit contending that there's this systematic effort to attack and discredit people, unbeknownst to me that there's this other barrage of people that are investigating such things, claiming the same issues.
State Department documents also show that at least 5 additional grievances from multiple offices had been filed against the same team of managers for their role in creating a hostile work environment.
It's a very insular culture, even by the standards of Washington or government agencies. It is remarkably insular, and they want to protect their own.
This was a problem I identified in my book, The Failure Factory. It's the paradox of needing a government system and a bureaucracy to get things done. But what happens is that the bureaucracy turns on itself. And instead of focusing on its external mission, and this is often the case in the State Department, although there are lots of dedicated people there, the bureaucracy often turns into itself and looks at its own preservation.
While Higbee's claims focused on a hostile work environment within the Diplomatic Security Service, more severe allegations were surfacing throughout the agency. In February 2012, the American Foreign Service Association, AFSA, sent a letter to the State Department, which was turned over to Acting Inspector General Harold Geisel. The letter raised concerns of wrongdoing by DS agents that included privacy violations and sexual misconduct. An investigation was ordered, but there was a question of objectivity, as Geisel would be overseeing a probe into a department he once served. Geisel is a former U.S. ambassador who was known to have close ties to Undersecretary of State for Management Patrick Kennedy.
Almost always when you're an inspector general, it's sort of a retirement, what they call a sunset position, precisely to protect the independence of that inspector general. You do not want inspectors general worried about getting promoted or advanced, essentially tempting human nature there. They really need to be independent.
In most of these cases, these are all officials who are working from the same play sheet, and that play sheet is protect the bureaucracy at all costs. And I've seen that in spades at the State Department, where protecting the agency and its policies is more important than really sounding the alarm on difficult problems.
In addition to the reports of employee misconduct, as described in the February 2012 AFSA letter, an October 2012 internal memorandum from the Office of the Inspector General, or OIG, described a pattern of covering up misconduct at the State Department. The memo described 8 additional instances where senior political appointees and Foreign Service officials influenced, manipulated, or simply called off internal investigations.
The allegations of misbehavior and subverted investigations are shocking.
There's an old saying in Washington that the cover-up is worse than the crime. But in this case, both parts of it are disturbing. Allegations of prostitution and pedophilia, and allegations that those crimes were somehow covered up or not looked into.
The memo cited 8 examples. Among them, in Beirut, allegations that a State Department security official engaged in sexual assaults on foreign nationals hired as embassy guards.
Another had to do with allegations that former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's security detail engaged prostitutes on foreign trips and that the practice was endemic.
In Baghdad, information that an underground drug ring operating near the U.S. Embassy supplied State Department security contractors with drugs.
An investigative agent says an ambassador routinely ditched his protective security detail in order to solicit sexual favors from both prostitutes and minor children. Yet a senior State Department official allegedly told him not to open an investigation, but instead send a memo to Washington.
Sources told CBS News the ambassador was called to a meeting in Washington with Patrick Kennedy, Undersecretary of State for Management, but was allowed to return to his post.
These unclassified, handwritten notes from the OIG investigation were obtained by For the Record. Until now, they have never been released to the public. The notes show that in addition to the alleged misconduct described in the 2012 AFSA letter and the OIG memo, there were several other allegations of criminal wrongdoing, which the State Department failed to investigate, including a report that a DS agent who lost his service weapon got a replacement through a mafia-run factory in Bulgaria, a federal employee suspected of child abuse and neglect, and a report of 2 contractors, one of whom is a former DS agent who operated brothels overseas. The State Department was aware of the operation, but continued to list the contractors as in good standing.
But if you have no accountability, which is what the system is set up as at the State Department, then ultimately people behave like any people would without any accountability or any price to pay for bad decisions or bad behavior. You can break laws at the State Department. You can commit felonies against the State Department. You can commit felonies of defrauding the State Department, and you won't get fired as long as you're loyal to the Foreign Service.
And perhaps no one is more loyal to the Foreign Service than Undersecretary of State Patrick Kennedy, a man at the center of the OIG investigation, and also a key figure in the congressional investigation into Benghazi.
State Department employees represent the United States abroad 24 hours a day. We advocate and represent for U.S. ideals and values, and so we are very clear that no one should be involved in what we term notoriously disgraceful conduct. We don't believe that anyone should put themselves in any kind of a compromising position in regards to their conduct abroad.
At the State Department, where it's not accountability that determines your career prospects, but rather loyalty to the system, you end up getting someone like Patrick Kennedy, who, I will add, is actually better than the typical person at his position historically at the State Department. But his handling of Benghazi in particular, and handling some of the whistleblower cases, any other job on earth, he would have been fired and should have been fired. But the State Department system makes it that as long as you are loyal to the system at the State Department, that you are protected. And it's a very clear signal sent to everyone else.
Welcome back to For the Record. At the same time the State Department was dealing with the fallout from its failures in the Benghazi scandal, reports of rampant corruption and criminal misconduct inside the department became public. In response, officials employed a number of damage control tactics, which included a coordinated effort to silence whistleblowers like Rick Higbee.
What this has really started to show is how far bureaucrats will go to cover up and protect their institutions. But as I go through it, I keep coming back to this woman, Aurelia Fidenison. I mean, she's a really central and important person as far as this investigation goes.
Yeah, she absolutely is. She's a retired OIG inspector who had been assigned to work on this internal investigation. She ended up doing an interview with CBS News, and it brought on a lot of unwanted attention. So she's really reluctant to sit down and do more interviews. She's not really comfortable doing it, but she did agree to sit down with me and talk on background.
You can see why she's hesitant. She's really tied up in exposing a group of government officials who have gone to great lengths to cover up criminal activity, falsifying official records, and even as far as lying under oath in some cases.
The Diplomatic Security Service, or DSS, is the State Department security force. They protect the Secretary of State, U.S. ambassadors overseas, and investigate misconduct by State Department employees. But according to an internal State Department Inspector General's memo obtained by CBS News, some of those investigations were influenced, manipulated, or simply called off.
By June 2013, allegations of criminal misconduct within the State Department's Diplomatic Security Service were public. The department maintained that officials were addressing the scandal.
We hold all employees to the highest standards. We take allegations of misconduct seriously, and we investigate thoroughly. All cases mentioned in the CBS report were thoroughly investigated or under investigation, and the department continues to take action.
While the official narrative was there's an ongoing investigation, internal State Department documents obtained by For the Record tell a different story. These documents expose a deliberate attempt to remove all references to specific investigations and cover-ups from the Inspector General's report. From November 2012 until it was officially released 3 months later, the OIG report underwent a series of changes and revisions. In this draft, there are direct references to 4 of the cases listed in that October 2012 memo, including a report that a 7th floor or executive level State Department official ordered DS to stop the investigation of an ambassador accused of pedophilia. In December 2012, OIG investigators held a meeting with senior officials. In that meeting, a senior State Department official, identified in this sworn affidavit as Assistant Secretary of State for Diplomatic Security, Eric Boswell, said, quote, "This will kill us." Days later, all references to specific cases in the OIG report were scrubbed. By the time the final report was issued, even generic references to the senior State Department leaders were gone, replaced by external influences.
My heart really went out to the agents in that office because they really want to do the right thing. They want to investigate the cases fully, correctly, accurately, and they can't.
Aurelia Fidenison is a former inspector with the State Department's OIG. She was assigned to investigate the allegations of misconduct within the Diplomatic Security Service in 2012.
She's a retired military intelligence colonel and a veteran of over 20 years with the Foreign Service, who is, in my mind, in my opinion, the epitome of integrity.
Fidenison retired in December 2012. However, before she left, she asked that her name be removed from the final report on DS misconduct. She felt the investigation had been compromised. Fidenison was reluctant to do an on-camera interview, but she did meet with For the Record producers off-camera to review the facts of the case.
She, had documents that they had given to her and she had kept, but she was concerned that the people that spoke out were going to be retaliated against and attacked. And, I asked her what documents were there, and she said, I can't tell you. It's just not going to happen. And so, after talking with my lawyers, we served her with a federal subpoena. And so, I told her, with all due respect, there's subpoena, there's a process server coming to your house to subpoena these documents.
After receiving that subpoena, Fidenison filed for whistleblower protection. In one of the subpoenaed documents, she recounts a December 2012 meeting she attended with key DS managers to discuss the OIG investigation. That was the same meeting where DS Director Eric Boswell said, "This will kill us." What is noteworthy is who else was in attendance. Senior DS managers Scott Boltrowitz and Tracy Mahaffey.
Heard that the testimony about to hear on this case should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so correct?
Yes.
I do.
On February 21, 2013, Boltrowitz and Mahaffey gave sworn testimony during discovery proceedings in Higbee's lawsuit.
Are you aware of any governmental agency, United States Congress, or any other governmental investigative body that has similar criticisms of diplomatic security's failure to have or follow through proper administrative policy or procedures?
None that come to my mind right now.
Are you aware of any investigations by any agency, federal government or otherwise, into diplomatic security, into whether they uniformly or properly administer their policies in connection with employees or the administration of diplomatic security?
I'm not aware of any.
Since Boltrowitz and Mahaffey were briefed on the investigation into criminal activity and misconduct by State Department agents at that 2012 meeting, these two law enforcement officials may have committed perjury.
I can tell you this. It's commonplace in my litigation that they have, when I say they, management officials have provided facts under oath that they know not to be true.
This is a big problem within government, getting to the bottom, getting to the facts about various investigations and various shortcomings, especially when it relates to security. By all means, officials must be forced to tell the truth. They must be held accountable, and there must be oversight. But too often, especially in a big bureaucracy like the State Department, that isn't done.
One thing I've really noticed about this is you take a step back. Here's Rick Higbee. He goes all the way through this thing for 15 years, ends up in a major lawsuit that ends up exposing this bureaucratic mess, and lo and behold, it ends up going all the way to the top.
Patrick Kennedy and Cheryl Mills, and there are two people that'll probably sound familiar because they were identified really in the House investigation into Benghazi as two key State Department, I guess you would call them obstructionists in that case, blocking that investigation. And we know from this memo, the October 2012 memo, that they were heavily involved in this case as well.
This overall problem of blocking investigations or interfering with investigations is not just isolated to state. I mean, all you have to do is look at the various scandals around Washington, and you see it's a rampant problem.
This one sticks out, and maybe this one's worse in the fact that you go through the investigation, you look at the notes, and you page through here. Dozens of law enforcement officials under oath have lied. The investigation gets stalled or diverted, and nobody gets fired.
Fidenison, who was a DSS agent for 26 years, was part of the IG's team that prepared the draft report and is now a whistleblower. She's had discussions about her concerns with Congress. 2 hours after CBS News made inquiries to the State Department about these charges,
I'd like to talk to you, but if you could turn off the recording device.
Investigators from the State Department's Inspector General showed up at her door.
Ma'am, I can't discuss with you with the recording device.
So if you come out as a whistleblower, they will use every last lever at their disposal to apply pressure to you to get you to shut up or leave.
Fidenison told For the Record that investigators from the Office of the Inspector General wanted her to sign a non-disclosure agreement and admit to stealing documents. She refused.
The fact that diplomatic security agents would go to a whistleblower's house and try to coerce them into not blowing the whistle is very troubling. It shows that they really are trying to cover up something, and it really requires that that person be protected. One of the problems with the Obama administration in particular has been a widespread politicization of government agencies, where political officials at the highest levels have been using the bureaucracy, in this case an example, the Diplomatic Security Service, to try to cover up embarrassments and to try to cover up wrongdoing, and it must be exposed.
I can say broadly that the notion that we would not vigorously pursue criminal misconduct in any case is preposterous. And we've put individuals behind bars for criminal behavior. There is record of that. Ambassadors would be no exception. But of course, we are conducting investigations of all of these cases, and I don't have anything further to speak to the process or status or anything along those lines.
3 days after that press briefing, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Ed Royce, sent a letter to Inspector General Geisel demanding he turn over earlier versions of his office's report. Chairman Royce felt the OIG was withholding evidence discovered by its investigators and issues documented in EEO complaints. 16 days after the Royce letter was sent, the law offices of the attorneys representing both Higbee and Fidenison were burglarized.
A local law firm representing federal agents in a whistleblower complaint against the government was broken into multiple times last weekend, and because of the implications of this case, the attorneys don't believe they were picked at random.
They broke in, and they came and they took one computer, then they left. Then they came back to the crime scene, or the same site they burglarized, took another computer. They were trying to rip open drawers that would have documentary evidence, and they left behind things that your typical criminal would never leave behind. Well, you know, I deduct that they're looking to find out more information that we had relevant to the whistleblower disclosures that we made. And a couple months after that, my email account was completely gutted. So,
when you say gutted, what does that mean?
Not one email left was in there. There was the email for about 4 years was just deleted, taken away.
An investigator specializing in technology forensics and computer-related crimes examined this case and tells For the Record there is compelling evidence that the emails were removed by a person or organization with advanced intelligence capacity.
I tend to not want to speculate, but in my opinion, I fear it's the government.
If you read the individual stories about the horrible treatment of certain whistleblowers or other things that happen at the State Department, each story in and of itself seems hard to fathom. It seems just over the top. But if you understand that they get to act with utter impunity, a total lack of accountability, it starts to make sense.
That lack of accountability appears to have reached the highest levels of the State Department. Documents obtained by For the Record show that Undersecretary of State Patrick Kennedy and the Chief of Staff for then-Secretary Hillary Clinton, Cheryl Mills, were directly involved with blocking investigations by the department's Diplomatic Security Service. In the October 2012 OIG memo, Kennedy is accused of shutting down the investigation into former ambassador to Belgium Howard Gutman for his alleged sexual misconduct with prostitutes and children. Mills is mentioned in the same memo as interfering in the investigation into ambassador-designate to Iraq Brett McGurk. In the memo, McGurk was accused of sharing sensitive government information with his girlfriend, a Wall Street Journal reporter. Both Kennedy and Mills were also identified as committing similar offenses during the congressional investigation into Benghazi.
Undersecretary Kennedy and the Chief of Staff, I believe she was the Chief of Staff in the Secretary's office, Cheryl Mills, were directly involved in doing everything that they could to stop investigations, to influence investigations, to impact their ability to go forward. So that then later, apparently, the easy way to deal with this is to say there is no evidence. What evidence?
Cheryl Mills is a key Clinton gatekeeper. Cheryl Mills is a key Clinton guardian. She goes way back with the Clintons.
Micah Morrison is the chief investigative reporter for Judicial Watch. Over his more than 25-year career, he has conducted a series of investigations into the Clinton administration and says Mills is a key cog in the Clinton machine.
She defended the president during impeachment. She was a member of the White House counsel staff, and she has accompanied Hillary Clinton throughout her career. So Cheryl Mills is a Washington insider and Clinton loyalist.
If the allegation is true that Patrick Kennedy and Cheryl Mills were completely obstructing and diminishing the capacity for investigations to occur and move forward, that is, and not only do they have a responsibility, Patrick Kennedy and Cheryl Mills, to report those crimes, but they then become an accessory to that after the fact.
Both Kennedy and Mills have faced other accusations of abuse of power. In March 2014, the State Department OIG issued an alert to Kennedy identifying the mismanagement of contracts from 2008 to 2013, which resulted in the misplacement of more than $6 billion. Mills was deeply involved in a Clinton administration scandal known as Emailgate. According to court documents, Mills was part of a Clinton White House effort to withhold millions of email communications from federal investigators and members of Congress. In April 2008, a federal judge called Mills' participation in the scandal loathsome. 9 months later, Hillary Clinton named Mills as her chief of staff.
The Clintons, time after time, escape accountability. Partly because they're not transparent, partly because they're master obstructionists, master evaders of the law, and I should note that often they work right up to the edge of the law. Sometimes they don't break the law, but they withhold the documents, they play the game. As somebody who has covered them and sparred with them for really decades now, I'm shocked to say, they play the game masterly.
I'm honored to be President Obama's nominee for Inspector General of the U.S. Department of State.
On September 17, 2013, the Senate replaced Harold Geisel and confirmed Steve Linick as the new Inspector General for the State Department. On March 31, 2014, Linick submitted his first semi-annual report to Congress, which contained no update on the status of the investigation into the mounting scandals within the agency. However, on August 5, 2014, Linick was one of 47 inspectors general who submitted this letter to key members of Congress, expressing concerns that multiple government agencies have established serious limitations on their access to records, which the inspectors say hinders their ability to adequately perform their crucial watchdog role.
I'm terrified that doing this interview will ensue a barrage of abuse of authority, because I've seen nothing but that. But I also think that if we don't stop ourselves, it can really impact you know, much larger things, and I then have a problem sleeping at night.
I think this State Department whistleblower is a hero. I feel like that this is an important issue that has to be exposed, and it requires courage. And I think that being a whistleblower certainly requires courage, and there should be a system that protects whistleblowers. There's some protections, but those protections have been eroded, especially under the Obama administration, because of this intense politicization of government.
I believe that doing the right thing is hard, but my faith and my values don't allow me to say it's unimportant and not my problem.
Journalism. Washington is broken.
Washington wants anyone who can find an army of lobbyists and lawyers.
The media bias, I guess, just depends on which channel you are. I think that we need a different point of view.
They can't stand the truth. Apparently, the news media can't stand the truth.
Congressmen and senators have lots of power, and we know the power corrupts.
Special checks and the winks and nods run Washington.